Aggregate races. Hello, my name is Alex Does F1 Stuff and welcome to another random F1 episode, and today's video is suggested by a commenter. What would aggregate races look like? Now, because I'm not 100% sure how to have approached this project, whether I look at decades, whether I look at particular races, I've only chosen to do 2020 to see how it kind of worked, to see what changes there were throughout the season. So without further ado, let's just take a look at some aggregate races. Now, the first question I'm sure you're asking is what exactly is an aggregate race? So let me just pull up a little example for you here. So if we have a race which is red flagged, and before the red flag happens, we have gaps for these four drivers, A, B, C, and D, of 5, 7.5, and 11 seconds. Now, normally the race would be restarted and they would run to the end and you would have a result after the red flag that looked a bit like this. Driver B managed to get past driver A and lead driver C by 2.5 seconds, driver D by 5, and driver A by 10. Now, in the normal realm of Formula 1, that would be it and the race is over. Driver B would be the victor and that is it. However, if you cast your mind back to, I believe, Japan 1994, when Hill was leading by 6 seconds, there was then a red flag period, Schumacher was P2, had to overtake Hill after the red flag and win by 6 seconds. There was an aggregate of the first portion of the race to the second portion of the race. And so going back to my little example here, if we apply this same aggregate to these two sets of times, we pull up a result that actually looks like this. Driver B comes out on top, 5 seconds clear of driver A, 5.5 seconds clear of driver C, and 11 seconds clear of driver D. Now, I will admit aggregate races are incredibly confusing, especially in terms of commentating and people following the race. You really have to understand the concept of it, and then you've got to do loads of maths in your head, so it is a completely ridiculous system to even run with. So let's apply it to 2020, as that is basically this channel, applying ridiculous maths and ridiculous unexpected scenarios to the 2020 season. So if I just pull up a list of the races that we've had so far in 2020, I've labelled which ones are the duplicate ones, so the 2 and 3 Italys, the 2 Bahrains, and the 2 Austrias. Now, because aggregates were only really applied to red flag races, and there were only 2 red flag races this season, I've decided to actually look at it at full safety cars as well as red flags. So if there was, for example, 2 safety cars, 2 full safety cars, I would take the gaps before the first safety car came out, then the gaps before the second safety car came out, and then the gaps at the very end, and then work out the aggregate gaps for those essentially 3 races. So the first thing we need to do is just split up the season into races of 2020 without the safety car on the left and with a safety car or red flag on the right, and we end up splitting them up like this. There were 5 races this year where there was no safety car or red flag, which means there were 12 in which there were. And then applying this whole aggregate idea to the 2020 season, I end up with a championship result that looks like this. Lewis Hamilton absolutely destroys Valtteri Bottas, 116 points clear. There is then Verstappen in P3, 32 points back from Bottas, then Perez P4, Ricciardo P5, Sainz P6, then Albon P7, then Norris, Leclerc, Stroll, Gasly, Ocon, Vettel, Russell actually pops up quite high up, then Kvyat, Hülkenberg, Giovinazzi, Raikkonen, Magnussen, Grosjean, Latifi, and then also Fittipaldi and Aitken, who did not score. Now, I will also be going over each individual race just to see what happened, but overall, it had literally no effect really on the championship. A couple of midfield changes happened here or there, but nothing really noteworthy. And so if I just pull up the quick positions chart as well, we can see that for the races that Hamilton competed in, obviously he didn't compete in Sakhir, he scored a podium in each one. That is absolutely ridiculous. Bottas only ended up with 2 victories of the year in Austria and Russia as well. I think he actually had 2 in the normal year anyway, not 100% sure, can't quite remember. Then Verstappen actually ended up with 2 as well. Then we had Sainz with a victory and also Russell. And then just to see what the championship would look like in terms of a graph here, that is, and we just fill in all of these times here, and I think Hamilton ended up winning by Turkey or something like that. It was absolutely dominant. He would have won by even more than 116 points had he actually competed in Sakhir. And then we have the positions graph as well, which just looks absolutely bonkers. There's all sorts of arrows and all sorts of lines going everywhere. So now we're just going to take a look at those 12 races and see exactly what has changed and to see how much of an impact having aggregate races actually have. So we will pull up the first race, and that is Austria. Here is the regular leaderboard. This is exactly what it would have been. This is also post or pre-penalty, pre-Hamilton's penalty, as I couldn't be bothered to put him back 5 seconds and then recalculate everything. It was too much like hard work. And then, of course, we have the aggregate times here, and you can see that not a great deal happens. Norris moves forward, Perez moves forward, Leclerc goes back, Sainz goes back. But the most important thing is the gaps are ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. We have 190 seconds. That's 3 minutes covering Bottas to Latifi as well. And that's not even getting lapped. These are people on the first lap. That is just bonkers. Now, I will just point out that the tables on the left denoting the regular leaderboards, they will only contain the people that finished on the first lap, on the lead lap, not the people that were lapped. It's just, again, me being lazy. I couldn't be bothered to put in the times of the lapped people, as then it messes up my table, as it's calculated automatically with a sort function, and it's just there. Times get confusing, especially when people get lapped, as they're smaller than those that actually win the race, so I can't automate. It gets confusing. So the table on the left that denotes the regular leaderboard will not show the people that are lapped, but it will also show the people that are DNF'd as they don't have a time. I hope that made sense. But anyway, back to the leaderboards, and we pull up the next race, which was Styria, and here is the regular, Hamilton leading Bottas by 14 seconds, and then we have the aggregate, Hamilton leading Bottas by 20 seconds. And you can see the only real change came from Ricciardo getting past Perez, Norris getting past Perez, and also Stroll getting past Perez as well. But again, the gaps are just bonkers. That goes back to 36 seconds, 53 seconds, and then it leaps all the way to 70 seconds. It's just absolutely ludicrous. And then we hop on into the next couple of races, and we have Britain up next, as Hungary didn't have anything. This was the regular positions or regular gaps for Britain. And then we have the aggregate as well. It just, 200 seconds. That's 2 or 3.5 minutes almost. That's just crazy stuff. Then after Britain, we skip all the way to Belgium. That was the next race that had a safety car. And then we have the aggregates here. Again, it's much the same. The gaps just change so much. And the positions don't really change at all. We only had 2 positional changes this time. We had Raikkonen falling behind Vettel, and then we had Gasly getting in front of Norris. Nothing really happened. Then we head on into the next 2 races, and we pull up Italy, which of course had the red flag incident, and this is where we had the first leader change. This is the first time that a victor would have been different if we used aggregate times, and Carlos Sainz would have ended up with the victory over Lewis Hamilton, as Lewis Hamilton was leading comfortably and had an enormous gap before the first red flag, as did Sainz. He was running P3 for such a long amount of time, and he was only 0.4 of a second behind Gasly. So Sainz would have come out with that victory from Hamilton, Norris and Stroll. This one changed a lot. This is where it would have the most impact in races like Italy. And then we pull up Tuscany, which also looked much the same in terms of its aggregate as well. Nothing really changed. Russell moved up a couple of places up into the points for Williams, but that was about it. Then heading on into the next 2, we pull up race of Russia, and this was a race that was won by Valtteri Bottas from Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. Again, the regular leaderboards don't only denote the people that finished on the lead lap. We then pull up the aggregates, and again we see that the times shoot all the way up to just below 3 minutes. But once again, it is an almost identical order. In fact, it is identical for all of the point scorers. Magnussen just comes forward a little bit, but that's really the only significant impact. Then next up after Russia, we have the Eiffel Grand Prix and Germany. Lewis Hamilton from Max Verstappen from Daniel Ricciardo, all the way down to Danny Kvyat. And then we have the Eiffel Grand Prix aggregate. Hamilton from Verstappen, from Ricciardo, from Perez, Sainz, Gasly, Leclerc, Stroll. It's all identical. And the gaps go to almost, 260 seconds. How fast is that? That's over 4 minutes. That's stupid times. Then we head on into the penultimate 2 races, and we first pull up Imola, Hamilton from Bottas, from Ricciardo, from Kvyat, from Leclerc, etc. And aggregate, Perez ends up getting a podium ahead of Ricciardo, Kvyat and Leclerc, etc. Then other than that, there aren't a great deal of positional changes, but once again, the gaps are extended to just absolutely ridiculous scenes. Imagine having a gap of 150 seconds, and this is still on the lead lap because they never technically got lapped in either of the sections of the race. Then we end up with Bahrain as well. This was Hamilton from Verstappen from Albon from the two McLarens. And then in the aggregate, we have Hamilton from Verstappen. Perez actually bumps himself up there. As if you remember, there was a safety car at the very end of the race where everyone slowed down because of Perez, and I had to take the gaps at the end of the race, not the gaps at the end of the safety car, which is why Perez has ended up popping into the aggregate times rather than being a DNF, like he technically was, but because the safety car crossed the line and took the grid over the line, I had to take the gaps before the safety car. And then finally, we have the last two races of the season, and that is Sakhir, and this is again the next race which had a positional change. Hamilton is not in this one, he is replaced by George Russell after he contracted COVID, and it is George Russell who comes away with the victory. It would have been a Mercedes 1-2, Perez on the podium, then Ocon, Stroll, Albon, Sainz, Ricciardo, the two AlphaTauris. So this again would have had a significant impact. It's really crazy races are where the aggregates would actually have a significant difference. It needs to play out how it normally would, because if you remember in Sakhir, that's how it was. The two Mercedes were dominating for the first portion of the race, and then it got crazy in the second portion, and that's when we can have a significant impact in the aggregate times. Exactly like Italy. It needs to run almost normal for the first half, and then absolutely manic in the second half. And then finally we have Abu Dhabi. Max Verstappen from the two Mercedes, from Alex Albon from the two McLarens in the regular, and then in the aggregate, it's Max Verstappen from the two Mercedes, from Albon from the two McLarens. Yeah, it speaks for itself. It really, really does. And there we go. There is the 2020 season if it was run on aggregate times. Personally, it's a complete waste of time. They shouldn't resort back to this. It's utterly stupid. There's no need. It's needlessly complex. New fans are never going to be able to understand it properly. The commentators will understand it 100%. That's their job. But to listen to that and to do your own mental calculations around it, it's just going to get absolutely bonkers if they ever decide to bring this back. So I'm glad it has stayed in 1994. That was the last time that I can really recall it happening. It's just stupid. Maybe if I was to apply it to 2012, a more competitive season, it would actually do something, as I can only go back to 2012 with this idea, as I need the racing lap times, so I can actually work out where everybody was, and my data only goes back to 2012. So I could apply it to that season and see what happens, but for the seasons after that, where we had dominant teams like Red Bull in 2013, and then Mercedes from 2014 onwards, it's not going to have an effect at all. But there we go. That is the end of this aggregate races video. Thank you so much, Elliot, for your suggestion for this video. Much appreciated, and I appreciate all the comments that you leave on the statistical videos also. But if you have your own idea for a statistics video, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll make sure to respond and see what I can do with that idea. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode with whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.